demonstrates the procedures for the removal and installation of line replaceable units related to the engine buildup. These include the hydraulic filter assembly, the hydraulic filter element, the hydraulic pump low pressure switch, the core fire detection assembly, the fuel filter differential pressure switch, the low oil pressure switch, the oil pressure transmitter, the oil quantity transmitter, the oil filter clogging indicator, and the anti-ice valve. Hydraulic case drain filter element. Removal and installation. The hydraulic case drain filter assembly is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan case at the 9 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Remove the clamp from the bowl. Loosen the filter bowl and remove it together with the filter element. Discard the filter element. Discard the O-rings from the bowl and from the filter head. Installation. Install a new O-ring on the filter head. Make sure there is an O-ring on the new filter element. Position the new filter element in the bowl. Install a new O-ring into the bowl. Screw the filter bowl on the filter head. Tighten and torque the bowl. Position the bowl clamp and attach it to the bracket. If the red clogging indicator is out, remove the glass dome cover. Push in the indicator piston to reset it. Reinstall the glass dome cover and tighten it by hand. This completes the removal and installation procedure for the hydraulic case drain filter element. Hydraulic case drain filter assembly. Removal and installation. The hydraulic case drain filter assembly is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan case at the 9 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Loosen the bolts securing the 2 clamps on the inlet tube and the 1 on the outlet tube. Disconnect the inlet tube and the outlet tube from the filter head nipples. Remove the bowl clamp. Loosen and remove the bolts that attach the filter assembly to the mounting bracket. Remove the filter assembly. Loosen the bolts of the bowl bracket. Installation. Position the new filter assembly on the mounting bracket and secure it with the bolts. Hand tighten the bolts. Connect the supply tube and the outlet tube to the filter head nipples. Hand tighten the coupling nuts. Position the bowl clamp and attach it to the movable bracket. Hand tighten the nut. Tighten and torque the filter head bolts, the tube coupling nuts, the movable bracket bolts, the bowl clamp nut, the inlet tube clamps, and the outlet tube clamp. This concludes the removal and installation procedure of the hydraulic case drain filter assembly. Core fire detection system, removal and installation. The engine is fitted with 3 fire detection systems, one for the fan compartment attached on the AGB, one for the core compartment attached below the compressor case, one for the LPT compartment attached to the turbine rear frame. Each assembly consists of 2 independent capillary gas tubes attached by clamps to a tubular support, and both are connected to an electrical switch. For this demonstration, only the core fire detection system will be removed. Removal. First, disconnect the 2 electrical wires and the bonding strap from the 2 switches. Detach the supporting tube from the mounting brackets. Remove the fire detection assembly. Installation. Position the assembly and attach it to the corresponding mounting brackets. Reconnect the 2 electrical wires plus the bonding strap to each fire detection switch. This completes the demonstration of the removal and installation procedures for the core fire detection system. Hydraulic pump low pressure switch. Removal and installation. The hydraulic pump low pressure switch is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan case at the 10 o'clock position. Removal. Disconnect the engine harness from the low pressure switch electrical connector. Loosen the hose coupling nut. Loosen and remove the bolts and the lower clamp securing the switch. As you loosen the bolts of the block clamp, remove the lower spacer. Then remove the bolts and the block clamp. Disconnect the hose coupling nut and remove the pressure switch. Installation. Position the switch and engage the hose coupling nut onto its nipple. Position the clamp blocks around the body of the switch and attach them with the bolts and washers. Position the spacer and the lower clamp and attach them with the bolts and washers. Check the alignment of the key slots of the electrical connectors. Then torque the bolts of the clamps. Tighten and torque the hose coupling nut. Connect the engine harness to the switch electrical connector. This concludes the removal and installation procedures for the hydraulic low-pressure switch. Fuel filter differential pressure switch, removal and installation. The fuel filter differential pressure switch is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan frame at the 7 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Disconnect the electrical connector from the fuel filter differential pressure switch. Remove and discard the lock wire from the heat shield. Pull the heat shield off. Disconnect the fuel tubes from the switch. Remove the 3 bolts and washers that attach the switch. Remove the switch from the bracket. Installation. Position the differential pressure switch on the engine bracket and secure it with the 3 bolts and washers. Tighten the bolts by hand. Connect the fuel tubes to the switch and tighten the coupling nuts by hand. Torque the switch mounting bolts, then the fuel tube coupling nuts. Position the switch heat shield and secure it with lock wire. Connect the engine harness to the switch connector. This concludes the removal and installation procedures for the fuel filter differential pressure switch. Engine oil low pressure switch, removal and installation. The engine oil low pressure switch is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan case at the 10 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Disconnect the engine harness from the oil low pressure switch electrical connector. Remove and discard the lock wire and remove the heat shield covering the switch. Loosen the coupling nuts of the 2 tubes connected to the switch. Remove the bolts and washers that attach the switch to the bracket. Remove and keep the insulating shim. Detach the tubes and remove the switch from the bracket. Installation. Position the new low-pressure switch and connect the 2 tubes to the nipples. Hand tighten the coupling nuts. Position the insulating shim and secure the switch with the 3 bolts and washers. Tighten and torque the bolts. Tighten and torque the coupling nuts. Install the heat shield and lock wire it in place. Connect the engine harness to the switch electrical connector. This concludes the removal and installation procedures for the engine oil low pressure switch. Oil pressure transmitter, removal and installation. The engine oil pressure transmitter is mounted on a bracket attached to the fan case at the 10 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Disconnect the engine electrical harness from the pressure transmitter connector. Remove the bolt, nut, and washers and disconnect the ground strap from the transmitter. Loosen the 4 bolts of the transmitter clamps. Break the torque on the 2 coupling nuts of the tube connected to the side of the transmitter. And on the swivel T coupling nut at the top of the transmitter. Then loosen the 2 coupling nuts and remove the tube. Remove the 4 bolts, the clamps, and the bonding strap. Notice that each clamp consists of 2 halves and that the bonding strap is attached with the top clamp. Loosen the swivel T coupling nut, then remove the pressure transmitter. Installation. Position the oil pressure transmitter and engage the swivel T coupling nut on its top nipple. Hand tighten the nut. Position the 2 halves of the upper clamp around the transmitter. Secure the clamp loosely to the bracket with the 2 bolts. Be sure to attach the bonding strap with the right bolt. Position the 2 halves of the lower clamp and secure them loosely with the bolts. Reinstall the tube connected to the side of the transmitter. Hand tighten the coupling nuts. Tighten and torque the clamp bolts. Torque the swivel T coupling nut. Then the 2 coupling nuts of the tube. Secure the bonding strap to the transmitter with the bolt, nut, and washers. Connect the engine electrical harness to the transmitter connector. This completes the removal and installation procedures for the oil pressure transmitter. Oil quantity transmitter removal and installation. The oil quantity transmitter is mounted at the top of the oil tank located on the fan case at the 8 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Disconnect the electrical connector from the oil quantity transmitter. Remove the bolts and washers which attach the transmitter. Pull the transmitter out of the fuel tank. Remove and discard the O-ring from the transmitter. Installation. Install a new lubricated O-ring on the oil quantity transmitter. Position the transmitter on the oil tank and secure it with the bolts and washers. Tighten and torque the bolts. Attach the electrical connector to the transmitter. This completes the removal and installation procedures for the oil quantity transmitter. Oil filter clogging indicator, removal and installation. The oil filter clogging indicator is located on the lube unit mounted on the front face of the AGB at the 8 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. First, disconnect the electrical harness from the sensor. Remove the 2 bolts and washers securing the sensor to the lube unit. Remove the clogging indicator and remove and discard the O-rings. Installation. Fit the oil filter clogging indicator with 2 new lubricated O-rings. Position the sensor into the lube unit. Secure it with 2 bolts and washers. Tighten and torque the bolts as required. Connect the electrical harness to the sensor. This concludes the removal and installation procedures for the oil filter clogging indicator. Engine air intake anti-ice valve. Removal and installation. The air intake anti-ice valve is mounted on the inlet cowl aft bulkhead at the 5 o'clock position aft looking forward. Removal. Disconnect the engine electrical harness from the anti-ice valve connector. Disconnect the hose from the anti-ice valve. Loosen and remove the 2 V-clamps that attach the valve to the ducts. Remove the anti-ice valve. Remove and discard the metal seals. Installation. Position new metal seals on the anti-ice air duct and on the valve outlet. Position the valve between the forward duct and the anti-ice air duct. Make sure the flow arrow on the valve points to the air intake cowl, and the valve rear flange index is aligned with the anti-ice air duct. Attach the anti-ice valve to the ducts with the 2 V-clamps. Tighten and torque the nuts. Connect the hose to the valve. Tighten and torque the coupling nut. Connect the engine electrical harness to the valve connector. This completes the removal and installation procedures of the air intake cowl anti-ice valve.